actions for people of all ages. On Justice Sunday, or each spring, UU congregations come together to take action on one pressing human rights issue. In 2016, UUSC recommends April 3rd to explore economic justice and be a part of the movement to help people all around the world realize their rights. Justice Sunday calls for the greatest creativity among our worship leaders to invite the best that we have to offer, a contemporary public theology beyond partnership and polarization. It gives us as leaders a chance to challenge our people with the hope that it's at the core of our liberal and at its best liberating religion. Justice Sunday allows Unitarian-Universalist congregations and their leaders to take an opportunity to build a sense of the power of association. It embodies our sanctuaries, auditoriums, meeting houses, and spaces of assembly of faith turned toward the public sphere and of public accountability. Expresses among our people the deep spirituality of embracing the other as partner and teacher. Understands that people in our own congregational communities have varying relationships with the informal sector and other marginalized workers. Asks that we pay attention to who we are with each other and attend to the relationships we have with people in the world. Every contemporary economy consists of three layers. The most visible is the formal sector, in which people are employed in jobs that are measured as part of the labor force. And businesses are subject to some sort of regulations, taxation, and governmental oversight. The most obscure or invisible layer is the underground economy, which consists of illegal activities such as the drug trade, prostitution, human trafficking, and money laundering. The informal economy is the layer in which workers and entrepreneurial enterprises base their exchange in cash or barter, avoid regulation, taxation, and worker protections, and exist as needed as self-employed other persons who provide commodities and labor without creating permanent institutions that would become part of the formal economy. Often public opinion and policymakers conflate the informal economy with the underground economy, leading to the criminalization of informal economy activities. This results in informal workers facing a wide array of human rights violations for trying to earn a living. This issue is critical, as the informal economy includes millions of people around the globe and is observed and studied in many of the large cities of the developing world. Informal sector workers also can constitute a significant proportion of agricultural workers in the global south. Though a small proportion to our total economy, the informal economy of the United States is the largest informal economy in the world. How would our lives be different if all informal sector workers went away? How do we depend on them? Well, for example, of informal sector workers in the United States, we have day laborers, children, siblings, or spouses who provide critical labor at family-owned businesses, but do not get paid, receive benefits, or contribute to Social Security. Domestic workers, under-the-table workers, and even street musicians. The size of a country's informal economy depends on several things, including the government's role in providing employment through state-owned businesses, and long-term trends in terms of where the country is in the development process, as well as where the economy is in the business cycle. Countries that are experiencing increasing unemployment or stagnation in the labor market often have more sizable informal sectors, as people use their ingenuity to devise other ways to earn income, like peddling tortillas in the market, being informal recyclers, or working as subcontractors for a major overseas clothing manufacturer. Another factor helping to shape the size and nature of this part of the economy is how many immigrants or displaced people live in the country. Formal prohibitions against these residents working increases the pressure to earn income informally. Because of long-standing discrimination, cultural norms, and the need to juggle multiple roles within families, women tend to be unemployed disproportionately in the informal sector in many countries. The website of Women in Informal Employment, Globalization and Organizing is a rich resource for information on the internal informal economy. I'm going to read about one lady, Elba Rojas, who's a street vendor in Lima, Peru. For 25 years, Elba had sold chilies in Lima's thriving wholesale market, La Parada. She sells fresh produce here, providing income, and more income than she could earn in a factory. Elba was part of a community of more than 7,000 vendors who made their living in La Parada, assisted by a well-organized workforce of market porters. But things changed almost overnight when the city decided to relocate the wholesale market to an area less central. Construction of a public transport hub is a key factor in the relocation. Complaints from neighboring residents that the market was the only place for rats, criminals, and other undesirable elements also led the decision to move. Unfortunately, chaos and violence erupted when officials arrived to move the vendors out and set up barricades in late 2012. Accounts differ widely on who was responsible for all the violence. What Elba remembers most clearly about those terrible days was standing shoulder to shoulder with her fellow vendors and singing Peru's national anthem while the police moved toward them. I cried for a month, she recalled. Peace has been restored, but barricades and a police presence remain, as do the vendors like Elba. They continue to sell here at La Parada, pending resolution relating to the working space for them closer to the new wholesale location. But since the disruption, more than half the vendors have gone, and so have the customers. Elba says her sales, and thus her income, have been dramatically reduced. The hours she must work, however, have been increased. Because fresh produce is now offloaded at the new market area far from her central area, she must leave home at 2 a.m. every morning to go get her fresh chili so she can be back by 4 a.m. to sell them at her market stand. She was initially excited about moving to the new market area, which the vendors referred to as the Promised Land. But controversy has opened up since the city made it clear that to get space there, vendors must first front a significant sum of money to cover a 3-year lease, something Elba doesn't have. Now, she says she must stay at home because her bones are hurting. But she is cleanly aware that as a zone leader in her vendor organization, she has a responsibility to help the morale, and she doesn't want to let the other women down. So she perseveres, rising early, working as she always does, and drinking an herbal medicine concoction every day to help her with her aching bones. And that's just one example of how big business takes over and really isolates the workers who only make a little bit of money in the informal economy. The lack of worker protections, including not only essential benefits, but also livable wages themselves, easily equate the informal economy with lower wages and worse working conditions. Not surprisingly, these workers are more easily exploited in various ways: wage theft, sexual harassment, and for some types of domestic workers being treated as virtual slaves. Workers in the U.S. food chain are vulnerable to a variety of rights abuses. While most fall in the formal sector category, they experience many abuses of their rights: wage theft, unsafe working conditions, discrimination, retaliation for reporting workplace violations, and more. Additionally, the food chain relies heavily on immigrant workers. For a number of reasons, immigrant workers are especially vulnerable to these rights violations. Accordingly, it is critical to ensure that food chain workers are empowered to advocate for their rights and to stand in solidarity with them, so that they can ensure that their employers are held accountable and their rights are respected. A few facts about the food chain in the United States. Over 70% of all hired farm workers are foreign-born, and approximately 50% are undocumented. 62% of the nation's dairy farms use immigrant workers. 1/3 of meatpacking jobs are done by immigrants. 25% of restaurant workers are immigrants. 20% of cooks and 30% of dishwashers are undocumented. With 300,000 workers nationally, the poultry industry is a large and growing business. It produces more than $42 billion annually. A report produced by the Northwest Arkansas Workers Justice Center finds out the following, though. 53% are paid by payroll cards. 38% of these have had money disappear from their accounts. 78% have never been offered a promotion. 40% have never been offered a raise. 91% do not have access to earned sick leave. 91% were treated differently during OSHA inspections. The report also shows that people of color and women are most affected by discrimination and other violations of their rights. Informal economy workers are organizing around the world for their own lives, for their families, and for their communities. Regional organizations like Casa de Maryland in the National Capital Region, with which First Unitarian Church of Baltimore works, provide resources and many types of support for immigrant workers, including those in informal sector jobs. Groups such as CASA create employment centers, offer alternative documentation for workers, give consultation on the law, and represent the interests of undocumented workers in legislatures and courts. The National Day Labor Organizing Network, with over 40 member institutions throughout the country, is a national resource for information on day laborers. Our UU community has developed relationships with people organizing and representing restaurant workers. These workers sometimes live in the space between the formal and informal economies because they are compensated partly in wages and partly in tips. At the UU General Assembly in Providence in 2014, we adopted escalating inequality as a congressional study action issue that we are engaging in order to craft a statement of conscience for our association at the General Assembly in 2017. If we would like to further engage our congregation in study and action, they do have a study action issue guide that we could do on a study group type thing where you read different chapters every week and do some studying on it, if anybody's interested in that. Lastly, I would like to talk about the UUSC, the Unitarian-Universalist Service Committee, a human rights organization powered by grassroots collaboration. In more than a dozen countries throughout the world, UUSC fosters social justice and works toward a world free from oppression. UUSC's innovative approaches and measurable impact are grounded in the moral belief that all people have inherent power, dignity, and rights. Economic justice is essential for securing basic human rights, alleviating poverty, and achieving a more peaceful and just world. UUSC's economic justice program develops strategies and partnerships and networks, builds movements, and influences local, statewide, and national policy on workers' rights. UUSC recognizes that workers' rights are human rights and works to improve the lives of the world's most marginalized and vulnerable workers. Many workers around the world are employed in environments that violate their most human rights. Consequently, they struggle to earn a living, support their families, and live a life of dignity. In the United States, UUSC seeks to empower and advance the rights of workers in the food chain. Throughout the world, UUSC focuses economic justice on women in the informal economy. Some of their goals are foster the creation of fair, safe work environments free of intimidation and harassment that respect the human rights and dignity of all workers. Support movements to ensure living wages. Hold corporations accountable for violations of their workers' human rights. Empower and organize workers to advocate for their rights. Supporting the training of workers and activists to promote the good food purchasing policy governs institutional food procurement in their communities. Partnering to support trainings for workers in the restaurant industry to increase their access to economic opportunities. They also are engaging in research on workers' rights issues in the poultry industry in Northwest Arkansas. And supporting the expansion of the revolving loan fund for informal vendors and traders in Kenya. They're also engaging activists and supporters to call on Wendy's and Byrd to recognize the rights of workers in their food procurement policies. As far as Wendy's, right now the USSC is asking everybody to do a Wendy's boycott because instead of joining the Fair Food Program, which McDonald's, Taco Bell, Subway, Burger King have all agreed to join and pay a penny more per pound to the tomatoes to help alleviate farm worker poverty, Wendy's refuses to do this. They will not pay a penny, not even 1 penny more per pound of tomatoes for their tomato workers, the migrant workers. So I have this if you'd like to read this later about Wendy's and where you boycott them and why they won't even give up a penny per pound. What the USC has done so far is benefited 5,000 people directly and a further 15,000 people indirectly, all in the informal economy in Kenya, through an expanded revolving loan fund, leadership development, capacity building, and awareness-raising efforts about the rights of persons with disabilities. They supported the creation and distribution of a comic book designed to educate youth and adults about food chain workers that sold more than 500 copies in print and was received by more than 1,400 individuals at events and online. Supported training for 500 restaurant workers, an expanded network of 200 responsible restaurant employers, and 3 new training facilities for U.S. restaurant workers. And it initiated a series of training that will empower 36 workers to advocate for the good food purchasing policy, which benefits low-income students and seniors. And at your own leisure, you have a handout in your bulletin on some of the things they do, and there's some other things up here that they're working on, the social committee for the UU. Please stand and sing the